boat, and you will find some. So they cast it, and now they were not able to haul it in because there were so many fish. That disciple whom Jesus loved said to Peter, "It's the Lord." And when Simon Peter heard that it was the Lord, he put on some clothes, for he was naked, and he jumped into the sea. But the other disciples came in the boat, dragging the net full of fish, for they were not far from the land, only about 100 yards off. And when they had gone ashore, they saw a charcoal fire there with fish on it and bread. And Jesus said to them, "Bring some of the fish that you have just caught." So Simon Peter went aboard and hauled the net ashore, full of large fish, 153 of them. And though there were so many, the net was not torn. And Jesus said to them, "Come and have breakfast." Now none of the disciples dared to ask him, "Who are you?" because they knew it was the Lord. Jesus came and took the bread and gave it to them, and did the same with the fish. This was now the third time that Jesus appeared to the disciples after he was raised from the dead. And when they had finished breakfast, Jesus said to Simon Peter, "Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these?" And he said to him, "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you." And Jesus said to him, "Feed my lambs." A second time he said to him, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" And he said to him, "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you." And Jesus said to him, "Tend my sheep." He said to Peter the third time, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" And Peter felt hurt because he said to him the third time, "Do you love me?" And he said to Jesus, "Lord, you know everything. You know that I love you." And Jesus said to him, "Feed my sheep. Very truly I tell you, when you were younger, you used to fasten your own belt and go wherever you wished. But when you grow old, you will stretch out your hands, and someone else will fasten a belt around you and take you where you do not wish to go." He said this to indicate the kind of death by which he would glorify God. And after this, he said to him, "Follow me." This is the word of the Lord. Last Sunday, we left Peter weeping in the high priest's courtyard. He betrayed Jesus, the one that he loved more than anyone else in the world. And even though he had met Jesus on that Easter Sunday with the other disciples, there was still so much unfinished business, so many loose ends, so many broken pieces and parts to his relationship with Jesus, that we can imagine that Peter felt not totally on top of the world, not totally restored. No, I think in fact, he probably still felt broken, ashamed, incomplete, uncertain. What do you do? What do you do when you have done something so wrong? So wrong. How can you ever make it right again? And so we hear this story of Peter on the beach with the disciples. I imagine that Peter was really at loose ends along with the other disciples, and so they go back to Galilee where it all began, and they go back to the things that were familiar to them, fishing and nets and boats and idle conversations about the weather. They went back. Maybe Peter was thinking about restarting the family business. Jesus said, "I will make you fish for people." But notice what Peter's doing. He's going back to fish for fish. What had happened to all the promises, the beautiful promises of Jesus? Yes, there was a lot of unfinished business in Peter's life. And I think he found comfort in going back to familiar things and familiar places. You know, I find myself doing that, and I suspect you may as well. We've done something terribly wrong. We've broken someone's heart. We've left the shreds of our behavior around us. We've disappointed people. We've betrayed others. We've messed up our plans. And there's a kind of comfort in going back to the familiar routines, the familiar places in our lives. And maybe it's a way we have of sorting things out, of trying to get a new, fresh perspective as we go about our daily labors. But just as it was for Peter, we sometimes encounter Jesus in those moments. They fished all night. They're weary. They're tired. They have caught no fish. I suspect he really enjoyed that first night out on the boat again, seeing the moonlight glistening on the water, hearing the nets slap the surface of the lake, feeling the boat gently rocked by the waves, all familiar things, hearing the idle conversation of the other disciples. But they were weary, and at dawn, the sun rose over the lake. They saw a figure on the beach who said, "Cast your nets on the other side of the boat." Maybe he could see something they couldn't from a great distance. He could have seen the fish, a school of fish stirring the water. He could have seen a darkened area in the lake. Who knows? But they did as the stranger said, and suddenly the nets were filled with fish. So many they could barely haul the net in. And the disciple whom Jesus loved, that is John, said, "It's the Lord." And Mr. Impetuous, Mr. Peter, throws on some clothes, jumps in the water, swims to the shore, of course, leaves his friends with all the work to do, but rushes to the shore, and there, in an ordinary place, in a routine activity, he meets the Lord once again. It may happen for us when we kind of retreat a little bit and go back to the ordinary things, when our lives are sort of fragmented and shattered. You may be making peanut butter and jelly sandwiches down at the homeless shelter, listening to the chatter of the people around you, speaking to the guests who come for food and for lunch. And you hear as clear as a bell a voice that says, "You are my beloved child. I forgive you. I love you." You could be driving on the highway on a business trip, really concerned about things that are going on in the business and some big mistakes that you have made and wondering how you'll ever sort it out. And suddenly, every blade of grass is aflame and every flowering tree is ablaze with the glory of God. And you realize this life that you were so questioning, the purpose that you were so in doubt about. Suddenly this life, this purpose is full of meaning again. Barbara Brown Taylor tells in a book, The Preaching Life, about how she discovered this truth, that God comes to us in ordinary moments and gives us new insights. She was a little girl, 7 years old, growing up in rural Ohio. Her family were members of a small Methodist congregation, and they often had the new young preacher over. He was unmarried, and I'm sure he wanted a good meal and a family he could be with. So they often had him over. But what was wonderful, Barbara Brown Taylor said, is that he would really give time and attention to me. He would pay attention to my little projects and my ideas and my dreams. And then one Sunday in church, he was talking about how God cares for the whole creation. And then he said, "And you know, I know a 7-year-old girl who keeps tadpoles in a bird bath so that she can watch over them while they turn into frogs." She too is a part of God's caring for creation. It wasn't just hearing her name mentioned in the sermon. It was realizing that her life was somehow vitally connected to the life of God, even if it was through tadpoles turning into frogs. She said, "I left that service suddenly eager to look for other signs all around me of heaven on earth." Peter and Jesus have a conversation that takes him places he never thought he would go. It's a simple conversation, isn't it? You heard it. "Peter, do you love me more than these?" These what? These boats, these nets, these people, these disciples? We don't know. More than this world around you, the familiar things of your life? I don't know. "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you." then feed my lambs. Peter, do you love me? Yes, Lord, you know that I love you. Then tend my sheep. Peter, do you love me? And Peter became incensed that Jesus asked the third time, but the bell went off in his head. For he remembered that Jesus had said he would deny him 3 times before the cock crowed twice. And in that moment, he knew that Jesus knew everything about him. He knew the broken parts of his life. He knew his own grief and disappointments. He knew his shattered dreams. And he says, yes, Lord, you know that I love you. Then feed my sheep. And in that moment, he gave Peter a call. Follow me. You know, every Christian has a calling, and in these moments when we may think that life is falling apart all around us, if we can simply be still long enough, we can hear the voice of God speaking to us in the broken shards of our lives, saying, follow me, feed my sheep. And he told Peter that you will be carried where you do not want to go, and you will die in a way you do not want to die, but you will glorify God. For tradition has it, as we will sing in a few minutes, Peter was crucified head down. Every Christian has a calling. You know, we've taken a big, huge word, calling, and we've made it into a very tiny, small word in the church. We think that preachers have callings. Called to be a minister of word and sacrament. But you know what the problem with that is? It lets all of you off the hook. We all have a calling to follow Jesus, to feed his sheep, to go where we may not want to go, but all to glorify God together. Barbara Brown Taylor learned not long after that experience in worship that the calling to follow Jesus is costly too. She said it wasn't long after that experience that her congregation in rural Ohio entered into a huge controversy during the civil rights movement. That young pastor said that the church is open to everyone. Well, that works as long as people's minds aren't totally closed. Well, you know what? They hung him in effigy and they ran him out of town. And she learned in that moment that not only is a call a wonderful thing, a call is a terrifying thing. For we are called to follow Jesus. And when we find Jesus, we really find our true selves. We find what it is to be a child of God, to have all the fragments and the broken pieces of our lives and the loose threads woven back together and made whole again as they were for Peter on that beach. Parker Palmer writes in his book about vocation, he says these words, vocation comes not from some voice out there telling you to be something you are not, but vocation comes from a voice in here telling you to be the very person God created you to be and claimed you to be at your birth. Some years ago, I went to a group meeting in South Carolina. The Sisters of Charity had started as a Catholic order, they had started a fatherhood project. And they had started this project to help young fathers between the ages of 17 and 26 improve their lives and become more connected to their children and to their children's families. I went to this gathering and 3 young men spoke, and one came in rather late. He came in ragged, paint-splattered clothes. He had ridden his bike there. He had to leave his job as a painter. He began to talk about his life, and he said, you know, before I encountered these sisters in this program, he said, all I thought about was myself, my life on the street, hanging out with my friends, doing drugs, and staying in trouble with the law, and I ended up in prison. But as I was getting ready to leave prison, I heard about this program, and I knew this is what I had to do. And they helped me. They taught me about myself. They taught me things I had never known. They taught me skills in carpentry and in painting. They taught me how to communicate with my children. And the tender shepherding care of that community taught him about Jesus. And he became a whole new person. He became a person of faith. He said, I want my children to be proud of me. And I'm proud of these clothes I'm wearing today. Because when people look at me, they say, ooh, there is a man who works hard. A man who respects himself. I saw those clothes. Those paint-spattered, worn work clothes. And to me, they looked like the dazzling white clothes that the angels wore on that first Easter morning. For he, like Peter, encountered Jesus. And encountering Jesus, he found himself in a whole new life. Amen.